He had built an empire on predicting probabilities, yet the simple act of her placing a coffee cup down revealed a variable he had never calculated.
The temperature of the porcelain against his fingertip felt colder than 1,000 failed acquisitions.
Elias Thorne lived in the quiet vacuum of absolute control. 46 years old, chairman and CEO of Thorne Industries, a global consortium specializing not in widgets or oil, but in information architecture.
His wealth was invisible, tied up in algorithms that managed supply chains and predicted demographic shifts with terrifying accuracy. Elias understood the world as data points moving through predetermined channels.
The only thing he could not predict was chaos, and the only place he felt genuinely disconnected from his own sprawling influence was a small, unremarkable diner 3 miles from his corporate headquarters.
It was called The Corner. Formica countertops, sticky ketchup bottles, and the relentless sizzle of bacon grease. It smelled like regret and strong coffee. Elias went there for the anonymity.
He arrived precisely at 6:45 a.m., sat in the third booth from the back, a location that maximized his sightlines while minimizing interaction, and ordered the same thing: black coffee, dry rye toast, and silence.
Clara was the waitress. She was late 20s, quick, efficient, and possessed an enviable economy of movement. She did not recognize him, and that was the core of her value. To her, he was just the gentleman in the back with the quiet.
She moved among the truck drivers and local regulars with an easy, tired grace. She never asked about his day. She never lingered.
She simply kept his coffee cup full, a perfect, steady stream of black liquid that mirrored the steady, controlled flow of his life. For months, this was their interaction, transaction, and observation. Elias studied her. He cataloged her habits, the way she twisted her wrist to check the time, the slight, almost imperceptible flinch when the cook shouted an order, the genuine, unforced smile she reserved only for the very elderly customers. He cataloged this data, but he filed it under anomaly, not she. She was the last piece of true, unmonitored human interaction he had access to.
His life outside the diner was a fortress of tailored isolation. His penthouse was sterile, his staff silent, his decisions instantaneous and absolute. In the boardroom, he spoke only to finalize, never to deliberate. Control was his currency.
He maintained it by keeping an impermeable membrane between himself and genuine uncertainty. But the diner and Clara represented uncertainty. One Tuesday morning, the membrane cracked. He was distracted, reviewing a complex legal brief in his mind, and he reached for his coffee cup too soon. It slipped. Not a major spill, just a sudden, spreading black stain across the white formica. It was a stupid, clumsy error he hadn't made since he was 18. Clara appeared instantly, not rushing but materializing. She didn't offer a patronizing apology or a quick generic wipe. She simply placed a clean, folded white cloth down first, anchoring the spill, and then brought a small, fresh carafe.
"It happens," she said, her voice low. "No judgment, no fuss."
Elias looked up. For the first time, he saw her eyes, a deep, indeterminate hazel, tired but sharp. "Thank you," he managed. The 2 words felt heavy, foreign on his tongue.
"You look like you're trying to calculate the trajectory of the moon," she replied, picking up the dirty cloth. "It's just—" That small observation, the precise naming of his internal state, was the first punch. He was accustomed to people only seeing his status, his facade, or his wealth. Clara saw the tired, calculating man underneath. She saw the trajectory.
He started visiting the diner more often, staying longer. He began to leave his phone in the car. This was a radical departure from his protocol. He was actively disconnecting from the neural network of his empire.
The conversations remained sparse, measured by the refill of the cup. They talked about the weather, the absurdities of the local news, and once, surprisingly, about a novel she was reading, a dense 19th century Russian text.
"Why?" he had asked, genuinely curious. Because the characters fail grandly, she said. They don't fail small and quietly like we. Elias Thorne had never failed, not in business, not in strategy. But sitting there, listening to the clatter of silverware, he realized his success had been purchased at the cost of experiencing anything grandly, even failure. He had traded depth for security.
He found himself looking forward to the 6:45 a.m. ritual with an anticipation that bordered on reckless. His days began to revolve around the diner, a strange gravitational pull overriding the pull of Thorne Industries. He started to understand that he wasn't just observing Clara. He was participating in a controlled experiment on himself, testing how close he could get to genuine human warmth before the control systems failed. The fear, subtle at first, was the fear of being truly known. If she knew his empire, his net worth, his power, everything about their small, authentic space would shatter. It would revert to the transactional. She would either treat him like a curiosity, or worse, like an opportunity. He knew that the moment money entered their delicate arrangement, he would cease to be the man who spilled coffee and started reading Dostoevsky and become merely the wealthy predator. He carefully curated his appearance at the diner. Generic jacket, slightly worn, no designer watch. He spoke about his job vaguely, referencing data entry and logistical consulting, truthful descriptions stripped of all scale and consequence. This deception felt heavy. It was a lie born not of malice, but of desperate preservation. He was guarding the single fragile, non-financial asset he possessed, his anonymity to her. Then came the inevitable collision. Thorne Industries was finalizing the acquisition of a major European competitor, a move that would redefine the global logistics landscape. The deal was complex, highly publicized, and required a rare public statement from Elias. His face, usually shielded from the cameras, was on the front page of the financial section of every major paper. He walked into the diner on a Thursday morning, preoccupied with closing documents, sliding into his usual booth. He ordered his coffee. Clara was slow coming to the table. She looked pale. When she approached, she didn't bring coffee. She brought the local paper, folded open to the business section. His face, magnified and serious, stared up from the fold. The headline was stark. Thorne acquires Aegis. The quiet billionaire makes his. The silence in that booth was immediate and absolute, eclipsing the noise of the sizzling grill and the morning traffic. It was the expensive silence of a nuclear fallout. Elias did not try to deny it. He simply looked at the photograph, then back at Clara. She asked. It wasn't accusatory. It was simply a demand for an explanation for the lie. I didn't lie about who I was, he said, keeping his voice level. I omitted the scale of. You omitted the structure of your entire life, she countered. She put the newspaper down, her hand resting flat on the cold formica. You sat here, playing a part, knowing that if I knew the truth, I wouldn't talk to you like this. Knowing that the moment that number, that obscene number, was introduced, it would change the gravitational pull of the. He tried to explain the isolation, the burden of his identity. He tried to articulate the freedom he felt in that booth. Her voice was low, contained, but devastating. You bought freedom here with deception. I felt free because I thought you were just a tired man needing coffee, someone on my level. I didn't have to factor in the weight of a multinational empire every time I. She took a slow breath, gathering the dirty plates from the neighboring booth. What you wanted, she continued, without looking at him, was a laboratory, a place where you could experiment with normalcy without risk. You wanted the experience of authenticity without paying the cost of. The accuracy of her analysis was staggering. She saw the calculation behind the casual encounters. He had wanted her genuine attention, but only if he could control the variables she was given.
Clara, he started, reaching across the table.
She pulled back, an almost invisible movement, but profound in its distance. I am not a character in your sabbatical, Elias, she said,
using his full name for the first time. The formality felt like a death sentence. I don't need a man to rescue me, and I absolutely will not be purchased. Not with gifts, not with opportunities, and certainly not with the implied promise of a life I never asked. She didn't storm out. She didn't cry. She simply turned around and walked toward the kitchen. Her movements just as efficient, just as graceful as always. Only this time, she didn't look back. Elias sat there for an hour. The coffee went cold. The aroma of bacon faded. The paper remained on the table, his face staring up, a monument to a colossal miscalculation. He understood then that his wealth was not an asset in this scenario. It was a cage. He had used it to shield himself from consequence, and in doing so, he had become incapable of genuine connection.
The money had become an impermeable barrier, classifying every human interaction as either a threat, an opportunity, or a transaction. Clara had been none of those until he forced her to recognize the financial weight he carried.
He drove back to the sterile heights of his skyscraper. The office was 110 stories above the noise, a silent tomb of tempered glass and cold steel.
He walked past his executive team, past the blinking screens of global markets, and into his private chamber. For the next 3 weeks, Elias Thorne operated on autopilot, moving through board meetings and signing documents. But the internal machinery had seized up. The data streams meant nothing. He looked at the quarterly projections, billions in profit, and saw only a meaningless abstraction. The numbers were supposed to represent power, security, and control. Now, they represented the exact distance between himself and a tired waitress in a greasy spoon diner. He tried to rationalize the loss. She was a waitress. There were millions of women, more educated, more sophisticated, better connected, who would leap at the chance to be with him. The algorithm for finding a suitable partner should be simple. Immediate gratification.
But the algorithm was flawed. It failed to account for the single variable that mattered, the ability to exist without the pressure of his economic reality.
He began the process slowly, methodically. He didn't seek her out. He knew that pursuing her with his resources would only validate her fear that he intended to buy her silence, her affection, or her compliance. The only way to bridge the distance was to remove the wall entirely.
He called his chief counsel, a man named Sterling, who had served him for 20 years.
"Sterling," Elias said, the voice calm, measured. "I am activating the divestiture plan. Immediate full liquidation of all non-essential."
Sterling didn't blink. "Sir, we have protocols for this. Can you specify the urgency and the—"
"Thorne Industries," Elias stated, looking out over the city that was effectively his domain. "I want out. All of it. I want a structured sale of my majority stake within 6 months.
Disperse the liquid assets into low-risk, diversified trusts, untouchable by me. The remainder," he paused, the silence stretching, "I will take as cash."
Sterling went pale. "Mr. Thorne, this is the company. This is your legacy. This is your—" "No," Elias corrected softly. "This was the fortress. I no longer require thee." The process was brutal, meticulous, and secret. Selling Thorne Industries wasn't like selling a car. It was dismantling the operating system of a global economy.
The market watched, baffled, as the quiet billionaire systematically stripped his hands of the controls. He navigated the acquisitions, the negotiations, the press queries, all with the same cold, strategic precision he used to build the empire.
Only this time, the goal was not expansion, but radical contraction.
He kept only enough liquid capital to ensure stability, stripped of the obscene, consequential weight of a 10-digit net worth. He wanted sufficiency, not power.
6 months later, the final papers were signed. Elias walked out of the monolithic headquarters for the last time. He did not look back at the polished marble lobby, nor at the quiet deference of his staff.
He was wearing the same slightly worn jacket he wore to the diner, and he carried one small leather bag containing a few essentials and a checkbook, that, while still significant, would no longer trigger global market fluctuations.
He disappeared from the financial pages entirely. The man who had been defined by scale became suddenly beautifully small.
Elias had discovered the name of Clara's hometown from a small detail she had once casually mentioned, a farming community in upstate New York, far from the polished chaos of the financial district.
He drove there slowly, observing the landscape shift from dense concrete and glass to rolling fields and dusty roads. He wasn't seeking a dramatic confrontation. He was seeking a baseline, a place where he could exist as a man, not a monolith.
He settled in a small, rented cabin outside the town perimeter. It had poor cell service, creaking floorboards, and the overwhelming scent of pine needles and damp earth.
He spent the first 2 weeks doing nothing but learning the rhythm of manual existence, chopping wood, fixing the leaky faucet, learning to manage a small grocery budget. He was terrified, utterly exposed, and finally, undeniably real.
He did not immediately seek out Clara. He knew he had to establish his life first, to prove to himself, before he could prove to her, that this simplicity was not a temporary stunt. It was the new architecture of his existence. He eventually found her. She was working, not in a diner, but managing the local general store, which doubled as the post office. It was a place where information traveled by whisper, and where time moved at the pace of the seasons. He walked in one cold afternoon. The bell above the door chimed, a simple, non-aggressive sound. She was stocking shelves, her back to him. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly. He stood near the counter, picking up a package of simple work gloves. She turned around, and their eyes met across the aisle of canned vegetables.
There was no shock, just a long, sustained moment of recognition. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, and didn't run. She merely absorbed his presence, reading the changes in him. The stiffness was gone. The clothes were functional, not curated.
His gaze was calmer, less calculating.
"Elias," she said, her voice the same low, steady tone he remembered.
"Clara," he replied. "You look different," she observed, crossing her arms lightly. "I am lighter," he admitted. "I sold the—"
This time, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of accusation or shock. It was the silence of consequence fully realized.
"Olive?" she asked. "The parts that made me impossible to approach," he clarified. "I kept enough to live on. I retired the architecture of." She leaned against the counter, still studying him. She understood that selling the empire was not a grand romantic gesture. It was the ultimate act of vulnerability, an admission that the fortress had failed him.
He hadn't just given up money. He had given up the identity that had defined his entire adult life.
"Why are you?" she asked.
"I am here because this is where a man who values authenticity should be," he said simply. "I am here because I discovered that the only thing I valued that wasn't quantified on a balance sheet was the perspective I found in your—"
"And what do you expect?"
"Nothing," he answered immediately. "I require nothing from you. I established myself here first. I got a job helping the local lumber yard with their logistics, actual logistics, not the kind that involves manipulating stock options. If you want me to leave, I will leave, but I am here to live a smaller life, and if I am lucky, I would like to occasionally buy my supplies from your—" He paid for the gloves. It was a transaction, pure and simple, devoid of implication. He accepted the receipt.
"That novel," she murmured as he reached the door. "The Russian one. Did you ever finish?"
"I did," he nodded. "I understood the ending far better than I expected."
"They failed grandly, Ben."
"They realized," Elias corrected, opening the door and letting the cool air sweep in, "that failure, if experienced honestly, is sometimes just the first step towards something."
He left. He did not wait for her reply.
Clara watched the door closed. The weight was gone. He stood there, not as a billionaire offering a golden cage, but as a retired, slightly awkward consultant who knew too much about Dostoevsky and now smelled faintly of pine.
He had returned to the baseline. The next day, Elias returned to the general store to buy milk. The day after that, he bought coffee. The conversations were still brief, built on observation and mutual respect. But now, when he spoke, the specter of Thorne Industries did not stand between them.
The grand narrative of Elias Thorne had been dismantled. His new life was built on minute details: the texture of rough wood, the smell of freshly cut hay, the shared, genuine laugh over a misplaced order.
He was learning that true power was not control over systems, but control over internal intention. He had traded prediction for presence.
They started small, shared coffee after the store closed, sitting on the porch swing, watching the indifferent sweep of the stars. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, deliberate reconstruction of trust, built on the mutual understanding that both of them had paid a high price for honesty. Elias had surrendered his empire.
Clara had surrendered her cynical resistance to the possibility of change.
The profound realization settled over Elias years later as he stood beside Clara, painting the peeling trim of their small house. He dipped the brush into the white paint, the sun warming his back.
He had not lost control. He had simply learned to control the one thing that truly mattered: the quiet, steady rhythm of his own expectations.
The brand failure, the spectacular divestiture, had led him to the only place where his balance sheet was finally zeroed out, leaving only the essential ledger of human connection.
The world never understood why Elias Thorne abandoned his empire. They filled the vacuum with rumors of burnout, clandestine deals, and hidden illnesses. But Elias knew the truth. He had simply traded an infinite, abstract number for a finite, tangible life.
He had traded the isolation of the penthouse for the cold, undeniable reality of a simple lock on a door he shared with someone who saw him, not his title. And that, he understood, was the true definition of unimaginable wealth.
We often measure the cost of things in currency, but the actual cost is almost always measured in the things we have to give up to keep them: our truth, our comfort, or our identity.
Elias Thorne learned that lesson only after his meticulously constructed life had been exposed to the harsh light of authentic rejection.
What happens to a mind trained to manage billions when it suddenly must manage only the simple logistics of daily human existence? How does the ego cope when the deference disappears and the silence is genuine? In the next installment, we explore the psychology of downsizing the self, the chilling effect of losing influence, the strange addiction to being recognized, and the difficult, often humiliating process of finding value in labor that cannot be quantified by Wall Street. We track the first 6 months of Elias Thorne's new life, the small failures, the quiet triumphs, and the shocking realization that the world keeps spinning even when you stop pushing it.
You don't want to miss the moment Elias Thorne fails to fix a simple garden hose and nearly breaks his newfound commitment to simplicity.